Many of you may have seen part one of this series presenting the history of Jehovah's Witnesses in these modern times. It was entitled, Bringing the Many to Righteousness in the Time of the End, and covered the activity of Jehovah's people from 1877 up to 1942. Here is a brief review of what happened during that period. It all started at Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, USA, in the 1870s, in this building named the Bible House. Later, in 1909, the Watchtower Society's headquarters was moved to Brooklyn, New York, where it remains to this day. The first president of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, Charles Taze Russell, was extremely interested in Bible prophecy. As early as 1877, he discussed the times of the Gentiles in a publication entitled Three Worlds, or Plan for Redemption. Brother Russell, later known as Pastor Russell, pointed out from the Bible that these Gentile times would end in 1914. This ending would signal the beginning of great distress for the people of all nations. Jesus had provided a composite sign that would mark his invisible presence at that time. In the New York World Magazine section, August 1914, appeared an article with large headline, End of All Kingdoms in 1914. The article said in part,
The terrific war outbreak in Europe has fulfilled an extraordinary prophecy. For a quarter of a century past, through preachers and through press, the international Bible students have been proclaiming to the world that the day of wrath prophesied in the Bible would dawn in 1914. Look out for 1914 has been the cry of the hundreds of traveling evangelists who, representing this strange creed, have gone up and down the country enunciating the doctrine that the kingdom of God is at hand.
This proved to be only the beginning of the work of these Bible students, now known as Jehovah's Witnesses. The death of Brother Russell in the midst of World War I in 1916 came at a time of increasing international turmoil and strife. The next president was J.F. Rutherford, previously a lawyer and judge, but now a dedicated minister of God. His administration started in January 1917. On April 6, 1917, the United States of America entered World War I. This was followed by intense persecution of the international Bible students, later known as Jehovah's Witnesses, because they zealously spread Bible truth which exposed religious falsehoods and incurred the hatred of the clergy. 8 members of the Watchtower headquarters staff were brought to trial and falsely charged with causing insubordination and disloyalty. On June 21, 1918, they were convicted and sentenced to 20 years imprisonment at the penitentiary, Atlanta, Georgia, USA. Less than a year later, March 26, 1919, the 8 brothers were released from prison following a review of their case. Later, they were completely exonerated. Immediately, they got the wheels of the Watchtower Society preaching organization moving again. In 1919, and again in 1922, these international Bible students scheduled conventions at Cedar Point, Ohio, USA. Jehovah's active force was clearly upon these modern-day witnesses as he again organized them to declare the good news of his kingdom under Christ. Speaking on the kingdom at the 1922 convention, Brother Rutherford assailed Christendom for exalting the League of Nations as the political expression of God's kingdom on earth. He concluded his talk saying, "The world must know that Jehovah is God, and that Jesus Christ is King of kings and Lord of lords. This is the day of all days. Behold, the King reigns. You are his publicity agents. Therefore advertise, advertise, advertise the King and his kingdom." Coming to 1931, a landmark convention was held at Columbus, Ohio, USA, July 24th to 30th. Here the large assembly stirringly adopted a resolution which stated, "We joyfully embrace and take the name which the mouth of the Lord God has named, and we desire to be known as and called by the name to wit, Jehovah's Witnesses. Henceforth the world would come to know God's people by a new name, a name that would identify them as representatives of the true God, Jehovah. Here are pictured some of the 840 who were baptized Saturday afternoon, June 1st, 1935, at the History-Making Convention in Washington, D.C., the capital of the United States. On May 30th, the day before, Brother Rutherford, the president of the society, had addressed an audience of 20,000, identifying the great crowd of Revelation 7, 9 through 15. This great crowd was seen to be not a secondary heavenly class, but a class with an earthly destiny. This large number of 840 getting baptized signaled that a vast multitude with an earthly hope was henceforth to be gathered. In 1939, Jehovah's Witnesses assembled at Madison Square Garden, New York, USA, June 23rd to 25th. By then, the totalitarian Axis powers had united in an effort to take control of all Europe. A Catholic action group in the United States, supporters of the fascist movement in Europe, tried to interrupt the talk, government and peace, at that convention, but in this they failed. When Jehovah's Witnesses met for a history-making convention in St. Louis, Missouri, USA, August 6 to 10, 1941, the Second World War was already underway in Europe. Brother Rutherford spoke on the widely advertised subject, Comfort All That Mourn. This talk, based on Daniel chapter 11, was designed to show the prophesied ending of the totalitarian Axis powers. In the lecture, Brother Rutherford pointed to the real hope, God's kingdom.
The rule of the earth for the Axis powers and the so-called democracies hold out to the people no hope of peace, security, life, or happiness. And I challenge any soul under the sun to point to any hope that they hold out. Those desiring blessings of life, liberty, and happiness must therefore now turn to the theocracy if they would enjoy these blessings. The Bible was written for the very purpose of furnishing the basis for hope of such as love God and His kingdom, that they might receive comfort in this hour of distress. The people must now gain a knowledge of the Bible, and thereby learn the way by which they could receive everlasting blessing.
Brother Rutherford also discussed with the assembled throng the all-important issue of universal domination and stressed the need to support Jehovah and His kingdom by Christ. Despite aerial warfare over Britain, the program was repeated in Leicester, England, September 3 to 7, 1941. Soon after the St. Louis Convention, the United States entered World War II on December 7, 1941. 1 month later, January 8, 1942, Brother Rutherford, the Society's second president, was dead at 72. However, this did not prove to be a time of indecisiveness for Jehovah's people. Rather, it was to be a time for direct action to intensify the work of preaching God's kingdom by Christ, and doing so even in times of great peril and stress. Brother Nathan H. Knorr was designated the third president of the Watchtower Society. He was neither hesitant nor inexperienced as to what God's will was as to public preaching. On September 18 to 20, 1942, a three-day New World Theocratic Assembly was held to encourage the brothers in those difficult times. The key city was Cleveland, Ohio, USA, with 51 other convention cities tied in by direct telephone lines, where scores of thousands simultaneously heard the convention program. The convention lecture, Peace, Can It Last?, focused attention on the peace period that was expected to follow World War II. The discussion centered on Revelation chapter 17, verse 8. President Knorr talked about the League of Nations that went out of existence in 1939 at the outbreak of that war. Now, what did those conventioners hear as to the post-war period?
Will the League remain in the pit? Again, the Word of God gives answer. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and is about to come up out of the abyss, and to go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wander, they whose name hath not been written in the book of life from the foundation of the world, when they behold the beast, how that he was, and is not, and shall be present.
Brother Knorr then stressed that an association of nations would rise again.
The fight between the king of the north and the king of the south, being for world domination, makes such an outcome of this total war unavoidable. The necessities of meeting the totalitarian aggressions and stopping them is forcing the nations to that final confederation of nations for a new order, whatever its form.
In this war period, the neutral stand of Jehovah's Witnesses resulted in the imprisonment of thousands of brothers. In Britain, even hundreds of our sisters were imprisoned for refusing to participate in the war. We can see in two separate pictures the total of hundreds of young brothers were imprisoned at Ashland, Kentucky, USA. These brothers were among 4,300 imprisoned in the United States during World War II. To keep spiritually strong, these brothers pursued their study of the Bible and Bible literature, so that most of them were better equipped spiritually upon leaving prison than they were when entering. The next step in the Society's new educational program was designed to expand not only the field work, but also branch facilities around the world. On the site called Kingdom Farm in upstate New York, the Watchtower Bible School of Gilead was established. Albert Schroeder, currently a member of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, was affiliated with the school at its inception.
As one of the original instructors, I look back over 43 years to remember February 1, 1943, the dedication day of Gilead Bible School. Brother Knorr and other governing body members spoke on that occasion. Brother Knorr outlined the purpose of the school. The objective was to train missionaries to reach many more lands with the good news of the kingdom. They were to become a heap of witness to the nations, for that is what the Bible name Gilead means. He said, "The Bible is your textbook. When you graduate, the Society will back you up in your foreign missionary assignment to be a success." The 100 students rotated to 4 classrooms. Their studies, all in English, were in the Bible, its prophecies and history, and about congregation organization. Spanish also was taught. Brother Knorr further said that the school would train them to reason with people of diverse religious backgrounds. They must prepare to live under different cultures, eat different foods, live in modest quarters. They were to become people persons. The school training proved to be just right for the phenomenal work that was launched back there in 1943.
This is the first class of Gilead, all full-time pioneers, comprised of 51 men and 49 women. Due to World War II and many restrictions, the students were sent primarily to assignments in North America, Central America, and the Caribbean Sea area. Gilead School was not the only step toward advanced Bible education in 1943. As the way for increased preaching opened up, more emphasis was directed to training the individual publisher for field service. At the 300 Call to Action conventions, April 17 and 18, 1943, A course in theocratic ministry was announced, including release of the first theocratic ministry school textbook. During the convention in Buffalo, New York, USA, August 9 to 13, 1944, this new congregational school was further demonstrated. All publishers were to be helped to express themselves better, equipping them for more effective field work. Male students were assigned to deliver talks before the congregation. This schooling served to train them for what was ahead. It also encouraged all who attended to dig into history, and most importantly, helped them to become more conversant with the Bible. Brother Knorr also announced that the Watchtower Society had completed the printing on its own presses of the American Standard Version of the Bible. This Bible renders the divine name as Jehovah throughout the Hebrew Scriptures. Other cities, such as Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, shared the same convention program and rejoiced to receive a Bible for field use that featured Jehovah's name. In the same period, the tide began to turn in favor of Jehovah's Witnesses and against their persecutors through a series of court victories. The United States Supreme Court, during May and June of 1943, handed down momentous decisions affecting freedom of speech, press, assembly, and worship. The late Grant Suter, who served as the Secretary and Treasurer of the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania, once commented on the American legal precedents established.
There was one day, May the 3rd in 1943, when the Supreme Court handed down 13 decisions involving Jehovah's Witnesses, and 12 of these were favorable. They were favorable not only to Jehovah's Witnesses, but to every person who has a real love of freedom.
Of particular interest is the court case of Murdoch versus Pennsylvania, a license tax case. Reversing itself, the United States Supreme Court said, "Plainly a community may not suppress or the state tax the dissemination of views because they are unpopular, annoying, or distasteful. That would be a complete repudiation of the Bill of Rights." On June 14, 1943, called Flag Day in the United States, a favorable court decision was announced respecting compulsory flag saluting in the public schools. It overturned the unfavorable Gobitis decision that made saluting the flag and reciting the Pledge of Allegiance mandatory for the children of Jehovah's Witnesses. In this new case of the West Virginia Board of Education versus Barnett, Children of Jehovah's Witnesses, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 to reverse itself. The Supreme Court said, "As applied to the appellants, that is, Jehovah's Witnesses, it punishes them, although what they communicated is not claimed or shown to be done with an evil or sinister purpose, to have advocated or incited subversive action against the state, or to have threatened any clear and present danger to our institutions or government." Meanwhile, in Germany and other European countries under Nazi occupation, thousands of Jehovah's Witnesses endured the privations of Hitler's concentration camps. These incriminating pictures show the actual arrests of Jehovah's Witnesses by German Nazi troops. It is estimated that approximately 8,000 of Jehovah's people were sent to Hitler's camps between 1933 and 1945. Our faithful brothers in Germany and other European lands were sent to places like Sachsenhausen, Belsen, Auschwitz, Dachau, Buchenwald, and Ravensbrück. In this ruthless persecution, children were separated from parents, husbands from wives. When World War II ended in 1945, the survivors were released. Subsequent investigation of the prison camps by Allied Army forces revealed scenes of unbelievable cruelty. Note the scenes of atrocity that left the first observers speechless and stunned. It demonstrated to the extreme man's inhumanity to man. Brother Knorr once said of that period,
"When the war crimes trials opened following the war, there was unfolded for man a history of atrocities beyond belief. It burned upon the memory of man the injustices that come with such worldwide conflicts and the hatreds that are possible between people due to political philosophies, religion, or race.
The Holocaust, as it has been called, the fiery destruction of humans, resulted in wholesale mass murder of innocent people. That the large majority of Jehovah's Witnesses survived this black period of history testifies to Jehovah's saving power and his provision of refuge for his people. On August 7, 1945, the world learned of the exploding of the first atomic bomb over Hiroshima, Japan. Within days, another bomb struck Nagasaki. The devastation of those cities and the deaths of tens of thousands of people forced an end to World War II. A new and terrible prospect for the human family was now unfolded. Possible destruction by means of nuclear weapons. A time of increasing fear was at hand. On January 10, 1946, in London, England, the first session of the United Nations convened. Incidentally, prayer was not used at such sessions in order to accommodate the great number of nations now professing disbelief in God. The charter was signed by the first 51 nations joining the organization. In time, a permanent home for the United Nations was built in New York City, USA, on the East River. All nations were now to have a voice in international issues and questions involving the peace and security of humanity. Inscribed on the walls of the United Nations Plaza were the words from the Bible at Isaiah 2:4. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. When these words were first chiseled into the wall of the United Nations Plaza, the citation of their origin was not included. In contrast, Jehovah's Witnesses were increasing their international activity by pointing to the real hope for peace under God's kingdom by Christ. The boat you see here was called the Scythia. With this boat, pioneer brothers toured the many Caribbean islands. As you recall, earlier the brothers and sisters depended upon the phonograph with recorded messages to take the good news to all who would hear. Now the Theocratic Ministry School was training brothers to become better equipped to present the message themselves, using the Bible to teach the truth of God's Word. They were becoming more expressive and conversant with the Scriptures, and learning at the Theocratic Ministry School each week what to say and how to say it. Within 2 years, the Theocratic Ministry Schools had produced many well-trained Bible speakers. In January 1945, a worldwide public speaking campaign was inaugurated. The first campaign that was launched featured 8 striking topics. The talks were given in parks, school auditoriums, public buildings, and private facilities. This work emphasized the need for more kingdom halls. This hall in Santa Barbara, California, USA, was typical of many early meeting places. In those days, it was not uncommon to rent available office space, storefronts, or rooms above stores for a kingdom hall, or to meet in buildings of simple block construction like this early kingdom hall. It was a small beginning to what one day would expand and grow. With the close of World War II, Jehovah's Witnesses started meeting again in conventions. This meeting in New South Wales, Australia in 1946 drew a peak attendance of 2,300. On August 4 to 11, 1946, the Gilead Nations Theocratic Assembly was held at the Municipal Stadium in Cleveland, Ohio, USA. It was truly a post-war international convention with a gathering of delegates from many countries to one central location. A peak attendance of 80,000 packed the Cleveland Stadium to hear the address, "The Prince of Peace." This 8-day convention established a pattern for other large conventions, with provisions being made to care for rooming accommodations, provide 3 hot cafeteria meals each day, handled traffic control, and a multitude of other convention-related services. At Cleveland, 2,602 persons were baptized. 2 new releases were enthusiastically received by the delegates. Of these, the Bible study aid Let God Be True clarified many Bible doctrines. Over the years, 19 million copies were published in 54 languages. At this convention, the Awake magazine was released to replace the Consolation magazine. On that day, the program also encouraged the witnesses to avoid popular trends of a demon-inspired, corrupt world. It was also announced that the Brooklyn Bethel home and factory would need to expand to meet the demand for Bibles and literature in the post-war period. Many brothers who had been in prison during World War II were here reunited to their great joy. It was truly a glad nation's assembly in 1946. These 3 full-time workers were among the first brothers in the United States to go on the road when the circuit and district work was organized following the Cleveland Convention in 1946. One of them, Theodore Jarris, now a member of the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, explains the work.
Circuit assemblies, like this one in New Jersey, became regular semi-annual events. Many were held in small halls, school auditoriums, or other public places. Sometimes it was necessary for small circuits to meet in cramped quarters, any available place that would provide adequate seating. Then, starting in 1948, district conventions became a regular feature, enabling brothers in different sections of the country to assemble together. During that year, Atlanta, Georgia was one of 6 such gatherings in the United States, where Brother Knorr addressed those in attendance. Both circuit and district conventions became an important part of our worship and provided a unifying effect upon the organization worldwide.
This expansion called for enlarged facilities of Bethel homes in many countries. Excavation started in New York, December 6, 1948, for a new factory addition, a 9-story structure that nearly doubled the original floor space. Bethel, too, had to be enlarged for additional workers to serve at the factory. The 1927 building remained intact alongside the new building erected and fronting on Columbia Heights. The new Bethel building, completed in 1950, was 10 stories high and provided for a new kitchen, dining room, Kingdom Hall, and other facilities. It was dedicated on January 30th, 1950. In 1947, instead of one great international convention, national assemblies were held throughout the world. This one in Los Angeles, California, attracted 45,000 at the Wrigley Field Stadium. The All Nations Expansion Assembly had an appropriate theme. As the tension between the political powers of the East and West started to heat up, the conventioners were urged to rally around the true signal raised on high among the nations. That signal is Christ Jesus, the ruling King of the kingdom. This assembly was a time of joyous association, strengthening our determination to press on with the preaching work in all nations. Now let us see some of the results achieved by missionaries sent out from Gilead School. First, Guatemala in Central America. Here is a group of 20 missionaries, the first to arrive there for foreign service. They secured a suitable branch office and missionary home as a center from which to work. Soon the fruitage of their loving preaching could be seen. Here you can see the first 12 witnesses baptized in Guatemala, along with the Gilead missionaries. These new brothers and sisters, young and old alike, now joined in the joyous work. Guatemala was typical of the way the preaching work developed in the 1940s in Central America and the Caribbean Sea area. By 1946, assemblies were held like this one at a workers' union hall, where about 180 persons attended. Late in 1943, Gilead missionaries were sent into Cuba, where this missionary home was secured. As the number of Cuban brothers grew, their preaching activity increased in the cities and spread into remote rural areas. The Society's President, Brother Knorr, and Vice President, Brother Friends, made regular visits to these countries. They are seen here with the Gilead missionaries, whom they strengthened and encouraged for continued faithful service. While visiting Honduras in the 1940s, Brother Franz had the opportunity to speak in Spanish over radio station Suyapa. Every avenue of communication was being utilized to present the kingdom message in these countries. Here you see the San Pedro Sula missionary home in Honduras during that early period. Gilead missionaries who were working in Honduras between 1950 and 1958 are seen here at the Tegucigalpa home and branch office. When Gilead missionaries arrived in lands like the Caribbean island of Trinidad, they found brothers and sisters of extraordinary faith already busy in the work, like this group in Tunapuna. All age groups showed real faith and diligence in their field activity and were prepared to go anywhere to preach the good news. The first Gilead missionaries seen here arrived in 1946 to assist the brothers in Trinidad with their preaching work. This was the branch office and home on the island of Trinidad in 1946. To serve the scattered islands, the preaching ship Sibia with its faithful crew of pioneers did a fine work. The Sibia is shown here visiting Trinidad. This is the branch office of the Watchtower Society in São Paulo, Brazil, that served Jehovah's Witnesses from 1936 to 1941. In Rio de Janeiro, a branch office was obtained in 1941 to meet the increasing demands for Bible literature and services in Brazil. Faithful ones, like American missionary Nathaniel Ewell, who was assigned to Brazil in 1936 and served faithfully until his death in 1948, was typical of the many, many devoted people who met the challenge of missionary service in the early years, even before Gilead School was operating. A convention like this one held at the Paulista Coliseum in São Paulo demonstrated the bright prospect for theocratic growth in Brazil. For 3 consecutive years between 1944 and 1946, Brother Knorr, then Watchtower Society president, had made service tours of the Caribbean area and countries of Central America to open up the preaching work in new fields. Here he is seen talking in the Spanish-speaking country of El Salvador. These 8 Gilead missionaries were among the early arrivals here. A small beginning perhaps, but diligent effort and devoted work would yield peaceable fruit. The early Gilead missionaries played a major role in this. In 1949, this meeting in Berlin, West Germany, illustrated the deepening split between East and West. A total of 30,000 witnesses assembled in an open-air theater to hear the public talk. Es ist später als du denkst, or it is later than you think. The brothers were strengthened to continue steadfast in preaching the good news despite personal hardship. In the period of 1946 to 1950, a battle was waged legally in Quebec, Canada, to seek relief from 20 years of Catholic persecution, spearheaded by Premier Maurice Duplessis. Jehovah's Witnesses based their appeal on Quebec's Freedom of Worship Act. A lightning-like 16-day witnessing campaign featured distribution of a tract entitled, "Quebec's Burning Hate for God and Freedom is the Shame of All Canada." Over 1,500,000 copies in English, French, and Ukrainian. The battle ended in grand victory for Jehovah's Witnesses. Favorable Supreme Court decisions in 1950, 1953, and 1959 resulted in bringing the witness work above ground in Quebec. Thus, 2 decades of mobbings, imprisonments, and beatings ended for the witnesses. The 1950s have been referred to as the decade of the super conventions of Jehovah's Witnesses. International anticipation was built up for the first of these, Theocracy Increased Assembly of Jehovah's Witnesses, held at Yankee Stadium in New York, USA, July 30th to August 6, 1950. It was an 8-day theocratic festival of international proportions. 10,000 witnesses came from 67 different countries outside the United States. Up until that time, it was the largest international group of witness visitors at any one location. They came from war-torn Europe, hundreds from Africa, Australia, and New Zealand. Asia, too, was represented, and so were the islands of the Pacific. Latin Americans came by the hundreds, and thousands came from Canada. Convention highlights included release of the New World Translation of the Christian Greek Scriptures. This was the first section of a planned New World Translation of the entire Holy Scriptures in modern English. Also, the Bible study aid This Means Everlasting Life was released. Ultimately, it was translated into 50 languages and distributed earthwide. That same day, Saturday, August 5th, 1950, Brother Franz spoke on the subject, New Systems of Things. He said, "Would this international assembly be happy to know that here tonight in our midst there are a number of prospective princes of the new earth?" There was a sudden hush that enveloped the stadium. Brother Franz then explained that the elders present, who were of the other sheep class, had the prospect of being made princes in all the earth under Christ's kingdom. The public address at that convention, Can You Live Forever in Happiness on Earth, drew an attendance of 123,707. Many were assembled at a trailer city in New Jersey, 40 miles away, listening all 8 days by telephone line tie-in. This display of literature in many languages demonstrated the international aspect of the preaching work of Jehovah's Witnesses. Returning to their native lands, the delegates were equipped to spread this message more effectively to all peoples in all languages. In 1953, Jehovah's Witnesses returned to Yankee Stadium for an ever greater gathering. This New World Society Assembly surpassed the 1950 convention in its international scope, drawing 22,000 delegates from 95 lands outside the United States. This time, a much larger trailer city was located in New Jersey, where 200 acres had been prepared to accommodate 1,500 trailers and 6,000 tents. Connected by direct telephone wire with Yankee Stadium, its 80 buildings and meeting tents provided amply for both the spiritual and physical needs of 45,000 temporary residents. The convention program was masterfully designed. Each day had its own territorial theme, covering Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, North America, islands of the Pacific, and so on. Brother Knorr released the new field instrument, Make Sure of All Things, which was warmly received by the vast assembly. In this book, Bible topics could be easily located and used in field service to defend the truthfulness of God's Word. The public address, After Armageddon, God's New World, drew a peak attendance of 165,829 persons, and it was necessary to accommodate the overflow crowd on the field as well as in the tents adjacent to the stadium. A training program designed to help new ones to become efficient house-to-house proclaimers of the good news went into effect in 1953. This laid emphasis on teaching the Bible more effectively in the homes of the people. In 1955, 13 triumphant kingdom assemblies in 10 weeks drew an attendance of 403,682. 42 airplanes plus 2 ocean liners, each with 800 passengers, were chartered to take the delegates to those conventions held in Europe. The largest gathering of that year was at Nuremberg, Germany, on the immense field called Zeppelinwiese. German dictator Adolf Hitler had boasted at this very location that Germany would rule the earth for 1,000 years. That false hope now lay wasted in ashes and dust. The victorious Witnesses of Jehovah gathered at this same place on Sunday, August 14th, 1955. 107,423 persons assembled to hear Brother Knorr speak on the theme, World Conquest Soon by God's Kingdom. A German newspaper editorial writer stated,
"This is no doubt the world's most dangerous age, but those who come quietly and unarmed, like the Jehovah's Witnesses were, have been a part of every dangerous age in history, an apparently lesser part it would seem, because the destroyers have always occupied history's spotlight."
The momentum of the post-war activity of Jehovah's Witnesses is well illustrated by the restoration of the witness work in Germany. A new Bethel home in Wiesbaden provided for much-needed expansion and included a branch office that was constructed to provide needed office space for an ever-increasing German organization. The International Convention Tour also included a stop in Berlin, where Brother Norr spoke to many brothers and sisters who secretly crossed forbidden borders to attend. He commended them for their fine work in the face of heated opposition and encouraged them to persist with every means at their disposal to preach the good news. These international delegates made stops too at Rome, Italy, and in Paris, France. Other countries were also expanding in this time of zealous activity. Bern, Switzerland built this new branch office, and in Strathfield, Australia, this branch office was constructed to meet the needs of the brothers in the land down under. In Toronto, Canada, this modern office complex and printery was built to gear up for Canadian expansion and growth. At World Headquarters in Brooklyn, the most modern and efficient printing equipment was secured to meet the ever-increasing demand for Bibles and Bible study aids. A new addition doubled previous floor space and made it possible to plan for future expansion in the United States. A look at the activity of missionaries from Gilead School 10 years after World War II shows remarkable progress by 1955. 25 semi-annual classes had now completed their schooling and moved into foreign assignments. In 12.5 years since its beginning, Gilead School produced 2,631 graduates. Of this number, 1,136 were ministers from 58 countries outside the United States. 1,495 were American nationals. In the earlier classes, 11% were of the anointed, and diligently spearheaded the missionary work abroad. This chart shows some amazing statistics. In North America in 1942, there were 75,589 publishers of the Kingdom Message. In 1955, the number had risen to 236,124. Look at the momentum in South America. 1942, only 807 ministers in the field. 1955, 18,000 kingdom proclaimers. Europe recorded 22,796 in 1942. By 1955, the number had increased to 227,374 kingdom proclaimers. Africa, in 1942, reported a total of 10,070. By 1955, it had risen to 98,146 active preachers. Perhaps a look at Africa would illustrate the great strides made on that continent. This couple, brother and sister William R. Brown, left their homeland in Trinidad and journeyed to West Africa in 1923. Because of Brother Brown's diligent preaching from the Bible, the public referred to him as Bible Brown. The work of the Brown family in Nigeria started to produce real results in what was formerly called the Dark Continent. By the 1950s, when Watchtower Society President Knorr visited Africa, the growth was clearly evident. Kingdom halls were being constructed and the work was becoming better organized. These people were willing to make any sacrifice in order to travel to a central location for joyous fellowship. The convention was held in the middle of the jungle. The brothers patiently hacked out a clearing for this meeting place and built common wooden benches to sit on. Others sat on the ground. Brother Knorr spoke through an interpreter to this vast throng of 20,000 in Kitwe, in the copper belt of northern Rhodesia, now known as Zambia. He was deeply moved by this touching scene of devotion and Christian love. These African brothers lifted their voices in harmony and sang praises to Jehovah. The strains of the beautiful music filled the open wilderness area. The great number of 1,195 baptized at this assembly reflected how Jehovah truly was turning to the people a pure language. Regardless of language or dialect, color or culture, he was drawing them into his organization. These people returned to their homelands, resolved to take up the preaching work in a more meaningful, energetic way. In the Far East, the people of Japan, recovering from a devastating war, began to receive a message of hope from Gilead missionaries sent there in 1949. Only a few faithful native witnesses were in Japan at the time of their arrival. For the next 14 years, a two-story Japanese-style home served as the Watchtower branch office in Tokyo. This country, steeped in Babylonish religious teachings and ages-old tradition, began to respond to Bible truth, and people like these and other faithful missionaries moved in. Bright light from God's Word, the Bible, began to shine upon the hearts of these teachable people. A high point of activity of Jehovah's Witnesses was reached in the summer of 1958. The Watchtower Society's headquarters in Brooklyn, New York, USA, became a hub of activity as preparations were made for another grand convention centered at Yankee Stadium in New York, July 27 to August 3, 1958. This was called the Divine Will International Assembly of Jehovah's Witnesses. Hundreds of brothers came to New York months in advance to prepare for the expected 150,000 guests to the city. Two giant stadiums were made available, Yankee Stadium and the Polo Grounds. Both would be needed for the throngs of Jehovah's people coming from 123 lands. At the convention, reports were made by branch overseers from around the world. For example, a brother from Germany presented stirring information concerning the brothers in Germany and their rapid restoration of the witness work in the post-war years. Each day of this 8-day convention had its spiritual highlights. For example, on Friday, a total of 194,418 heard Brother F.W. Franz present the proposition, why this convention should resolve. Then the Society's president, Brother Knorr, proposed that the following resolution should be adopted as read. He said,
"We will continue to preserve the unity of the organization, which unity we have expressed here on such a tremendous scale. And whereas we shall return to live under different forms of human government and different political rulers, we will not permit men who fight against God to break up our unity or to separate us from the theocratic organization."
On Sunday, August 3rd, Brother Knorr delighted the 253,922 persons in attendance with the public talk, God's Kingdom Rules. Is the world's end near? Then in his closing remarks, Brother Knorr told the conventioners,
"I believe that you will go on to the ends of the earth at the conclusion of this convention and continue preaching God's kingdom as the only hope for mankind and never waver, no matter what may occur, because you know your God. And may all of us as Christians stand shoulder to shoulder, serving Him forever and forever."
Yankee Stadium and the Polo Grounds literally overflowed with people that day. Tents set up around both facilities were jammed with additional thousands. Jehovah's blessing was poured out beyond measure. A highlight of the convention was the largest Christian baptism on record, a total of 7,136. People of all nations, races, languages, customs, and backgrounds had come together in one colorful, magnificent demonstration of love and purpose. By 1960, the growth of Jehovah's Witnesses worldwide required improved organization, particularly as to the spiritual shepherding of the flock by Christian overseers. Elders of the congregations were invited to attend a month-long Kingdom Ministry School designed to deepen their appreciation of the truth and instill in them a greater sense of responsibility respecting Jehovah's flock. Gilead Missionary School had moved from the Kingdom Farm location in South Lansing, New York, to Bethel in Brooklyn. Beginning September 1959, classes of elders arrived to begin Kingdom Ministry School training at the old Gilead location. Gilead Missionary School expanded its quarters at the world headquarters at Brooklyn Bethel. The Society's educational program was being enlarged so that Gilead students would now have the added advantage of training at the very hub of the international organization. Some would have the opportunity to study office procedure, printing, organization, and operation of a branch home under the supervision of expert brothers who had many years of experience. Welcome to 1963. More than 1 million worshippers of Jehovah were looking forward with keen anticipation to a round-the-world series of everlasting good news assemblies of Jehovah's Witnesses. The opening convention was at Milwaukee, Wisconsin, USA, June 30 to July 7, 1963. The next week, July 7 to 14, the convention moved on to Yankee Stadium in New York. Brother F.W. Franz, then the Watchtower Society's vice president, spoke on the subject, Messengers of Liberation. He explained why Babylon the Great, the world empire of false religion, must fall before Armageddon. Then he announced the release of the New World Translation of the Christian Greek Scriptures, now completed in 6 different languages: Italian, Dutch, French, German, Portuguese, and Spanish. In 1961, the complete Bible had been released in English, but this accurate rendering of the Bible in modern language now became available to many more language groups. The book All Scripture is Inspired of God and Beneficial also was released. This provided a wealth of information concerning the background, contents, and benefits to be derived from a study of each book of the Bible. Then Brother Knorr spoke on the subject, Execution of Divine Judgment upon False Religion. Following the lecture, he released the new book, Babylon the Great Has Fallen, God's Kingdom Rules. Groups of Christian delegates traveled around the earth and were joined by local assembled throngs in 10 consecutive weekly conventions. The traveling witnesses circled the globe. And for what purpose? To display Jehovah's unifying force and to derive warm Christian association with those of like precious faith. Convention traveling delegates moved from New York to London, England, where 50,111 met with the convention delegates at Twickenham's Rugby Union grounds. Meanwhile, an assembly was being held the same week in Stockholm, Sweden, where another 25,160 met to hear the program in 4 languages: Danish, Norwegian, Finnish, and Swedish. The Around the World Assembly next moved on to Munich, Germany, where an audience of 107,164 persons were present, and Milan, Italy, where 20,516 attended, representing 4 major language groups: Italian, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. It was estimated 4,000 of the total number were residents of Milan. Next, the convention stopped in Greece, a country with landmarks relating to the Christian ministry of the Apostle Paul, as at Corinth and Mars Hill in Athens. 1,400 convention delegates converged on Athens, only to be informed that the Greek government had canceled the permit for the assembly. This did not dampen the spirits of the Greek brothers, who rejoiced to have their brothers in their company. Then the world delegates stopped in Beirut, Lebanon, where they were able to meet with local brothers in kingdom halls. The next stop was Jerusalem. Here the conventioners could tour historic sites and sharpen their appreciation of the actual locales of so many events in the Bible account. A total of 583 delegates journeyed on, first to India, where a convention was held in the midst of a land dominated by false religious teaching. In Burma, too, the delegates noticed the many evidences of Babylonish religion. 603 met at the Burma Convention. On to Thailand, where the brothers met in a country whose temples, idols, and numerous emblems gave evidence of a people held captive to false worship. At this point, the tour divided into 2 sectors, the northern and the southern. The northern group traveled to Hong Kong, China, where a packed hall of Chinese-speaking people met with the traveling delegates. On to Manila, Philippines, where over 37,000 assembled at the Memorial Football Stadium, 12,000 of which were not Jehovah's Witnesses. In Taiwan, the brothers could see the progress being made to present the good news to the Chinese people. 1,500 attended. In Kyoto, Japan, the Kyoto Kaikan is packed out and evidence of good progress in expanding the work can be seen. Next up, Seoul, Korea, where 8,975 assembled at Citizens Hall. The developing of an organization of Jehovah's people in Korea is evident, and future growth is certain. The Southern Tour Group, meanwhile, was on the move in a different direction. Convention delegates begin their tour at Singapore, at the Victoria Theater. Then on to Indonesia, where great problems were encountered and overcome in securing a meeting place. In Melbourne, Australia, the tour enjoyed association with approximately 12,000 brothers. In Auckland, New Zealand, at the Auckland Town Hall and Civic Theatre, over 6,000 met together. Suva, Fiji, 1,080 met at the new Lilac Theatre from 17 different island groups. On to Hawaii, where 6,189 assembled at the Waikiki Shell, and representatives of many Pacific Island language groups join in peaceful assembly to share the everlasting good news. Finally, they all converged on Pasadena, California, USA, for the finale of this magnificent around-the-world assembly of Jehovah's Witnesses. The Rose Bowl in Pasadena was packed to capacity, with 118,447 attending the public talk, When God is King Over All the Earth. During this 71-day tour, 16,267 new ministers were baptized. A total of 570,932 persons assembled to hear the same public Bible talk. The concluding remarks at the Rose Bowl by Brother Knorr retraced the trip and concluded with an urgent appeal to all of Jehovah's people to shoulder the responsibility to care for the thousands of sheep-like persons Jehovah God was gathering into his one organization. Brother Knorr urged all the brothers to adhere to Jehovah's one organization. This they were resolved to do. A great number of new people began to embrace the truth. They rejoiced in their being released from Babylon the Great, and thereby found freedom from bondage to false religious beliefs and practices. Now where would all this lead? To what extent would the organization yet grow before the final end? What yet remained to be preached before this old system of things comes to its final end? These questions will be answered in the third part of this slide program series. So the March of Jehovah's Witnesses in this 20th century continues.